Hey guys, welcome back. I didn't finish recording last night, so I've got to try to hurry and do these this morning before I literally pack. Just throw all of this stuff into boxes. I've got all the boxes. It shouldn't take but a few hours, and I can finish it tomorrow if I need to. We're gonna move all the furniture tonight. Anyway, um, there we go. So we're in book four, talking about the just city, and they're going to use that at some point to start talking about the parts of the soul. I spent a lot of time in the last video talking about the parts of the soul. I watched a little bit more of that TV show that I mentioned in a previous episode, and the main character, he was talking about he actually mentioned Xenophon, who I guess is a real, he said he was a student of Socrates. I hadn't heard of this guy before. Um, so I don't know all my ancients, but Greek mercenaries, the 10,000. Yeah. Definitely the time of Socrates, 30 years before his trial, about the time he was born, about the time that Socrates went to the Oracle at Delphi. Um, I don't know if he was in Athens. Yeah, he was of Athens. So anyway, what he says about Xenophon is that Xenophon thought the best way to tame horses, and I grew up with horses, and this is absolutely true. This has taught me a lot about life, more than I realized. Um, is you don't just break them and you don't just dominate them. You show them that they can trust you. They're going to be gentle to them, kind to them, and helpful to them. Helpful to them depends on what the creature needs. In the case of horses, it's pretty much just food and water and some kind of relationship. They do benefit socially. They have a rich emotional life and intelligence. Um, very, very human-like intelligence and emotions. A- And well, they explain in the show that Xenophon thinks that their only instincts as prey animals are in order, fear, flight, and then fight. They will kick, they'll mostly run, and that's both of those are driven by fear. Excuse me. So, but the bad guy, the main big bad in the show, who's also like the father figure of the main good guy, right? So um, it's really this sort of almost Oedipal in the sense of like killing the father. It's not his real father, but it's the one that he was orphaned or abandoned by his dad, by his parents. And then he was abandoned by he thought he was abandoned by his brother. Um, and so he was raised into, now he had some character and they all had some character because they were mostly good to each other. And when you see him crash out and start attacking his brothers who are just as bad as him, it's unheard of. They never do this to each other. Um, and you can see that it's like acting out when he actually takes the eye out of one of his colleagues or comrades. Um, Everyone's devastated. No one really stops him. He'd probably shoot anybody who did try to escalate it. Uh, but it's just horrific to watch because you know that they really are a family, and so it's just tragic. Um, but they're the bad gang, right? Like, so it speaks to what Plato is talking about when he says that any group of injustice, for it to be injustice or for it to function as a group, has some sort of justice to it. Were it pure injustice, it would just be like that, you know. In some way, I guess Plato would say that the injustice they've done to other people is starting to infect their internal workings, as a sort of retribution. In more recent times, we see this in boomerang imperialism. So the technologies that we use to surveil and colonize other countries, um, such as what Israel does in Gaza to the Palestinians and the West Bank and the Golan Heights. pretty much everywhere after 1967. Um, I have very strong feelings about that that I'm trying to be polite about. Israel uses those same technologies on their own citizens, who've mostly all served in the IDF and have themselves been militarized by that experience and training. And yeah, and now we're seeing it with US police departments. So this is the infection of the injustice that's expressed outwardly by a gang of thieves, kind of infecting internally at some point, as it must do. Sort of a psychoanalytic critique of the pathology, the behavioristic pathology of a demos or a group of people colonized or colonizing, because the colonizing then colonizes themselves eventually. Anyway, the injustice then infects themselves eventually. Um, but yeah, with the horses, he just says that. So he's using the horse example to explain how I don't know if he says it in particular, but it's pretty clear that he's talking about people too, and that this is his approach over and again in the show. This is his approach to not only his own group, but strangers he interacts with. Um, People mistake him for a pastor. And I've told you some of the other stuff. I don't know why it's on my mind. I guess because I've been watching it, but let's keep moving. Um, these orders we give them, Adamantus, are neither as numerous nor as important as one might think. Indeed, they are all insignificant, provided, as the saying goes, that they guard the one great thing. Though I'd rather call it sufficient than great. What's that? Their education and upbringing. For if by being well educated they become reasonable men, they will easily see these things for themselves, as well as all the other things we are omitting. For example, that marriage, the having of wives, and the procreation of children must be governed as far as possible by the old proverb, friends possess everything in common. That would be best. And surely, once our city gets a good start, I mean, that sounds kind of communistic. Uh, Surely, once our city gets a good start, it will go on growing in a cycle. Good education and upbringing, when they are preserved, produce good natures, and useful natures who are in turn well educated, grow up even better than their predecessors, both in their offspring and in other respects, just like other animals. That's likely. To put it briefly, those in charge must cling to education and see that it isn't corrupted without their noticing it, guarding it against everything. Above all, they must guard as carefully as they can against any innovation in music and poetry or in physical training that is counter to the established order. So Plato wanted to censor some of the arts because he thought that they um, could cause the imaginations and the passions to run wild and become revolutionary or disruptive. And he kind of didn't really trust the average person to be able to guard against and make good decisions when faced with those things. He wasn't a populist. Me, for example, I think, with the way I was explaining desire and that part of the city, um, you just need rhizomaticity. You need acceleration and hard lessons. Um, it's again a Vajrayana path. And the quicker that desire fails, experiments and fails and learns, um, the better it is for everyone. And so bad music and innovations in general would probably support this. Kind of thinking of a paper in open access computer science discourse called I think it's called The Carnival and the Bazaar. And this paper was taken in some really terrible reactionary alt-right spaces with like dark enlightenment. Repudiate and exoriate aren't the words I'm looking for. I want to distance myself and have nothing to do with these people. I don't even want to mention their names to you. They're becoming more prominent, and most of the people in government and the MAGA government have been influenced by them. And their idea of what should happen is to lean towards hierarchical pockets and interlocking complexities of control and again hierarchy. Um, which is very much a cathedral model, honestly. But in computer science, what it means is cathedral models prioritize stability, where they don't release updates very often. They maintain a kind of central code, like computer code. So say it's open source. So like this is like Unix and Linux. And say that Linux, the kernel of Linux wants to update. The cathedral model would only do that once every 10 years, once every 5 years. And it would only do so in a way that if it offered new functions, was able to integrate them with the source code without requiring more hardware processing power or just more, it would have to be as efficient and as lightweight still. Efficiently coded, efficiently. And some of that is not just like clean coding. Some of that is being creative with um, hardware and um, like materials engineering, basically. Like what material do you make things out of? What are the properties of the materials? What properties can you exploit that integrate into a computer language? Um, and how can you manipulate them in very basic terms without whole language systems or operating systems? Those kinds of things, those kinds of creative innovations that are like just good bones, good design. I was thinking, for example, like this is a very cheap thing that I can get for, I got this and two pencils for less than $2.50, which is probably just um, external, like it's probably manufactured in another country. But it's really cool. It holds the erasers and the lead, and this thing won't slide further than it needs to. It's got like a lock, and it's all plastic. There's no like metal. There's no complex. It's just good design. That's why part of why it was able to be so cheap is it was designed well once, and the replication of that good design is was not expensive. Um, so that's what I was. So lightweight cathedral models. Versus the bizarre model. Um, and again, we're talking about Plato's recommendation that you should not release innovations in music and poetry, right? And we're talking about whether wisdom dominates desire, reason dominates desire, or whether desire and the townspeople and the populist, the demos will learn for themselves, fail for themselves. Um, and that's more of the bizarre model, actually, where and I think it kind of depends on what scale you're talking about. Like you need a mixture. You can only have a bizarre model if part of the bizarre model includes those stable um, features. If the bizarre model just continually expands past without giving the opportunity to retain the stable features or to choose that mod, that addition, and you're constantly forced to deal with all these imperfections yourself, or they're not play tested out. Theoretically, even one person should be able to play test out and problem solve all and learn for themselves all the issues in a single bizarre model, no matter what breadth it's on, whether it's one person listening to innovations in music and poetry, or whether it's lots of people learning and sharing their lessons that they've learned. Um, and really the question of to what extent you can share lessons or each person has to learn it for themselves is, I think, an open question. We need to keep reading. So yeah, I find the cathedral and bazaar model, or concept idea really helpful and interesting. I absolutely distance myself and repudiate, or yeah, maybe repudiate is what I mean. Refuse to accept to be associated with those alt-right, dark enlightenment folks. Renounce. If abjure is stronger, we'll go with abjure. I never knew you. Above all, they must guard as carefully as they can against any innovation in music and poetry or in physical training that is counter to the established order. Um, I guess counter to the established order, this is his definition of justice too. So he says that a just action is one that sustains, preserves, or augments, increases the harmony of the soul or the order of the soul, and therefore the order of the city too. Those should be, to some extent, the same thing. So hopefully you're not innovating willy-nilly, but when you try something new or when the path goes into a new direction, it is for good reason, carefully considered, increasing the harmony of the soul and the established order of things. And they should dread to hear anyone say, people care most for the song that is newest from the singer's lips. I find a lot of solidity in Plato's phrasing. Quite enjoy it. Someone might praise such a saying, thinking that the poet meant not new songs, but new ways of singing. Such a thing shouldn't be praised, and the poet shouldn't be taken to have meant it, for the guardians must beware of changing to a new form of music, since it threatens the whole system. As Damon says, and I am convinced, the musical modes are never changed without change in the most important of a city's laws. This speaks to the energic, like energy based, and rhythmic or noise prominence, noise significance based. So if you have just a blanket of noise, it takes on significances and meanings to you in certain patterns and relations, which otherwise are just noise. And the way that it can take on those significances is rhythmic and energic. So it's affective. Affective perception of a sort of sense grammar, why things stand out, why they don't, what the structure, the obvious structure is to one person and why it's not obvious to another person. Um, I kind of started writing on this a few years ago, but I wasn't able to finish it, and I plan to come back to it. But Didion, Joan Didion, she says that grammar was a piano she learned to play by ear. And I was kind of thinking about Walter Benjamin's work on hermeneutical materialism, the language of things, material communion, a communion of objects, the human divine naming of things, and the architectural language of Paris in the Arcades project. Projects. Project? This project. I have it back there. I just haven't read it. Hold on. Sorry. I should have paused or something. I thought Winchester was getting sick, so I had to listen, but I don't go back and edit these videos, so I'm not going to cut that out. So I should have paused. I'll try to think to pause when something like that is happening in the future. I was going to wait to pause to see if I need to run over there and like get him outside, um, because he was wheezing and I thought he might be throwing up. There he is. See that tail wagging? He's fine. Well, all right. Someone might praise such a, no, we read that far. You can count me among the convinced as well, Adamantus said. Then it seems, I said, that it is in music and poetry that our guardians must build their bulwark. At any rate, lawlessness easily creeps in there unnoticed. Yes, as if music and poetry were only play and did no harm at all. It is harmless, except of course that when lawlessness has established itself there, it flows over little by little into characters and ways of life. Then, greatly increased, it steps out into private contracts, and from private contracts, Socrates, it makes its insolent way into the laws and government until in the end it overthrows everything, public and private. Well, is that the way it goes? I think so. Then, as we said at first, our children's games must from the very beginning be more law-abiding, for if their games become lawless and the children follow suit, isn't it impossible for them to grow up into good and law-abiding men? It certainly is. But when children play the right games from the beginning and absorb lawfulness from music and poetry, it follows them in everything and fosters their growth, correcting anything in the city that may have gone wrong before. In other words, the very opposite of what happens where the games are lawless. That's true. These people will also discover, sorry, there was a hair in my mouth. I think it was a mustache hair. These people will also discover the seemingly insignificant conventions their predecessors have destroyed. Which ones? Things like this. When it is proper for the young to be silent in front of their elders, when they should make way for them or stand up in their presence, the care of parents, hairstyles, the clothes and shoes to wear, deportment, and everything else of that sort. Don't you agree? I do not agree. Well, these are examples he gives. I think there are certainly seemingly insignificant conventions that we take for granted, and that, like I said before, courage maintains until we reject them and then we fail and we learn why they were important to begin with. So I think he's agreeing with me there. So I don't know why he doesn't want the city to, so like for the regular people to learn these lessons too. I guess because they don't need to, they mostly just, maybe it's only the philosopher who lets their desire learn the hard way. I'm not sure. Otherwise, poetry and music would be no problem. They could develop the citizens more than anything else through their um, failure. So I do. I think it's foolish to legislate about such things. Verbal or written decrees will never make them come about or last. How could they? At any rate, Adamantus, it looks as though the start of someone's education determines what follows. Doesn't like always encourage like? It does. And the final outcome of education, I suppose we'd say, is a single, newly finished person who is either good or the opposite, of course. That's why I wouldn't go on to try to legislate about such things, and with good reason. Then, by the gods, what about market business, such as the private contracts people make with one another in the marketplace, for example, or contracts with manual laborers, cases of insult or injury, the bringing of lawsuits, the establishing of juries, the payment and assessment of whatever dues are necessary in markets and harbors, the regulation of market, city, harbor, and the rest? Should we bring ourselves to legislate about any of these? It isn't appropriate to dictate to men who are fine and good. They'll easily find out for themselves whatever needs to be legislated about such things. Yes, provided that a God grants that the laws we have already described are preserved. If not, they'll spend their lives enacting a lot of other laws and then amending them, believing that in this way they'll attain the best. You'll mean they'll live like those sick people who, through licentiousness, aren't willing to abandon their harmful way of life? That's right. And such people carry on in an altogether amusing fashion, don't they? Their medical treatment achieves nothing except that their illness becomes worse and more complicated, and they're always hoping that someone will recommend some new medicine to cure them. That's exactly what happens to people like that. And isn't it also amusing that they consider their worst enemy to be the person who tells them the truth? Namely, that until they give up drunkenness, overeating, lechery, and idleness, no medicine, cautery, or surgery, no charms, amulets, or anything else of that kind will do them any good. It isn't amusing at all, for it isn't amusing to treat someone harshly when he's telling the truth. You don't seem to approve of such men. I certainly don't, by God. Then you won't approve either if a whole city behaves in that way, as we said. Don't you think that cities that are badly governed behave exactly like this? When they warn their citizens not to disturb the city's whole political establishment on pain of death. The person who is honored and considered clever and wise in important matters by such badly governed cities is the one who serves them most pleasantly, indulges them, flatters them, anticipates their wishes, and is clever at fulfilling them. Cities certainly do seem to behave in that way, and I don't approve of it at all. What about those who are willing and eager to serve such cities? Don't you admire their courage and readiness? I do, except for those who are deceived by majority approval into believing that they are true statesmen. What do you mean? Have you no sympathy for such men? Or do you think it's possible for someone who is ignorant of measurement not to believe it himself when many others who are similarly ignorant tell him that he is 6 feet tall? No, I don't think that. Then don't be too hard on them. The idea if everybody's ignorant, this other person who's ignorant can't know any better either. Then don't be too hard on them, for such people are surely the most amusing of all. They pass laws on the subjects we've just been enumerating and then amend them, and they always think they'll find a way to put stop to cheating on contracts and the other things I mentioned, not realizing they're really just cutting off a hydra's head. So a lot of prisoner's dilemma, like brinksmanship and arms racing and gamesmanship, um, political gaming, instead of ensuring that the wealth of the soul, virtue itself, educate through education, um, is fully humming, so to speak. I wouldn't say developed or like invested in or deposited into, because Socrates or Plato very explicitly rejects that view of education, that it's not a deposit, it's a turning of the soul towards the true things that are already existing in nature, which speaks to understanding and truth as an experience and a tendency and a practice rather than a set of known facts or propositional relations and representations of the real that is external to a dualistic consciousness. Um, Also separate from truth as how we, in James and pragmatism, propositional truth is very modern. In James and pragmatism, truth is, and Dewey too. Well, in Dewey, truth is the perception, the unified perception of cause and effect. That's meaning. But in James, the genetic theory of it has to do with um, the mutual fine-tuning between between our understanding or our schema. It's how we like moderate different perceptual experiences and make sense of them. So, an old stock of beliefs that fit to an old set of experiences, we have a new experience that contradicts them. This is William James, what pragmatism means. And we find the solution of least complication to resolve those differences. And that in itself is a mutual fine-tuning in more particular instances. He also says pragmatism is a a hallway that leads to many doors, and the doors that it leads to, the rooms that you find, are different people doing contradictory things. Pragmatism is the hallway all the same that leads to atheism in any given religion. Um, the metaphysics and the denial of metaphysics, the refusal of its possibility. But more interestingly, I think he says that truth is the passageway from terrains of experience, between terrains of experience. So how we get from one environment to another and how we make sense of that transformation, how we transform basically from one environment to another, which is pretty like magical. Um, but here, because we're talking about protecting education, if we protect education and we ensure that education always develops people to think clearly with mathematics, this is what he'll say in book 7, and then turn towards things of the soul later in their life. Um, he'll say that a bad person with high intelligence can easily be made to be a good person, but he'll also say that, uh, well, we'll keep reading. I'm not sure exactly everything. I'd have thought then that the true lawgiver oughtn't to bother with that form of law or constitution, either in a badly governed city or in a well-governed one. In the former, because it's useless and accomplishes nothing. In the latter, because anyone could discover some of these things, while the others follow automatically from the ways of life we established. What is now left for us to deal with under the heading of legislation? For us, nothing. But for the Delphic Apollo, it remains to enact the greatest, finest, and first of laws. What laws are those? Those having to do with the establishing of temples, sacrifices, and other forms of service to gods, daemons, and heroes, the burial of the dead, and the services that ensure their favor. We have no knowledge of these things. And in establishing our city, if we have any understanding, we won't be persuaded to trust them to anyone other than the ancestral guide. And this God, sitting upon the rock at the center of the earth, is without a doubt the ancestral guide on these matters for all people. Nicely put. And that's what we must do. Sitting upon the rock at the center of the earth. On the rock in the sanctuary at Delphi, which was believed to be the navel or center of the earth. Okay. Nicely put. And that's what we must do. Well, son of Ariston, your city might now be said to be established. The next step is to get an adequate light somewhere and to call upon your brother, as well as Polemarchus and the others, so as to look inside it and see where the justice and the injustice might be. So here's where they're going to start looking at the parts of the soul, what the difference between them is, and which of the two the person who is to be happy should possess, whether its possession is unnoticed by all the gods and human beings or not. You're talking nonsense, Glaucon said. You promised to look for them yourself because you said it was impious for you not to come to the rescue of justice in every way you could. That's true. And I must do what I promised. But you'll have to help. We will. I hope to find it in this way. I think our city, if indeed it has been correctly founded, is completely good. Necessarily so. Clearly, then, it is wise. These are the four: wise, courageous, moderate, and just. So, reason, spirit, desire, and the order of the parts. Mind your own business, tend to yourself, those kinds of things. Um, keep your nose out of. Another thing I was thinking about from that TV show is like they're out in the Wild West in a territory, and when there's a lot of space, I was thinking about like when you're labor, when there's not a lot of excess wealth established to help you and a lot of like standing capital to help you accomplish the daily needs of survival. And so a lot of daily manual labor and attention is spent on just preserving things. When you're in that kind of world, I think little like it's more local and there's more distance between those local individuals, like just tending to taking care of themselves completely, um, 100% on their own. And the conflicts are often more local too. It's more frequent that like one person can't fix every single other local conflict, and they run into them all the time in that show. Um, so keep your head down. It's not an abscons of responsibility. It's not absconding responsibility. It's not in psychology, there is a known the bystander effect. Hopefully, if you've taken a psych class or if you take Psych 101, 1301, whatever, you'll hear about this. Hopefully, they covered in sociology. I guess we can cover it here. We're not a social science, but we're humanities. But um, the bystander effect is the phenomena that, like in a city where you expect lots of people to hear an obvious thing, you don't take the action that is necessary. You expect somebody else to do it. You pass the buck. So this happened in like the early 20th century where a woman was being attacked in a very public way. I think she was being sexually assaulted. Um, I think she was murdered in the end. And dozens of, this is when in New York, people often have the windows open because there's not a lot of central air conditioning. You didn't often get above 80 degrees or 90 degrees. Um, more than like decades ago. In the late 20th century, the early 20th century, New York stayed pretty cool. It was very northern latitudes. I've lived in New York and it's still like you might have a window unit, but window units weren't very common, I think, in the mid 20th. Anyway, um, dozens of people heard, and they all thought somebody else was reporting it and calling it in and stopping it. And nobody stopped it. Nobody called it in, nobody reported it. They all thought like, surely if this is another way of thinking about that is not just um this is obviously bad and somebody else is doing something about it. Another layer is probably if this were bad, somebody would have already done something about it. So this must not be bad. This is more in lines of like that's more lines of groupthink, like the Stanford prisoner experiment, or when you like push the limits of acceptable behavior in a group and you think, oh, well, if it were bad, we wouldn't be doing these things. I would be the only one being the bad person. Obviously, false thinking, right? Both of those are obviously wrong. So, minding your own business. Justice is the part staying in their own place. The craftsmen don't try to run the things, and similarly put, people who are best suited to make decisions and know what is good for people and what's not good for people, what will lead to the right outcomes and what won't, should not be soldiers and they should not be craftsmen or artists. I think there's something to be said about the artist being necessary to the philosopher, the mystic being necessary to the philosopher, queen and king who can process information, listen to spirit, listen to the forms, God, justice, what have you, intuition. Um, Spirit in the sense of like how Emerson uses it, not in the sense of how Plato uses it. But maybe they're not so far apart. Maybe more like the daemon. Each doing their own part. So then they would be in accord. That's funny. In accord means to be uh like harmonious. And but I actually was saying in a chord, in a musical chord. Um Oh, sorry. Clearly, that if we find any of these in it, what's left over will be the ones we haven't found, of course. And that's how they find justice, is they don't have any room for it left at the end. If you don't know about the Hydra, it was a mythical monster. When you cut off one of the heads, two grow back. So that's what they're saying about trying to like play whack-a-mole with treating the symptoms bad character in a society. Therefore, as with any other four things, if we were looking for any one of them in something and recognized it first, that would be enough for us. But if we recognize the other three first, this itself would be sufficient to enable us to recognize what we were looking for because it's the only one left. Clearly, it couldn't be anything other than what's left over. That's right. Therefore, since there are four virtues, mustn't we look for them in the same way? Clearly. Now, the first thing I think I can see clearly in the city is wisdom, and there seems to be something odd about it. What's that? Excuse, excuse me. I try to pause. I think that the city we described is really wise, and that's because it has good judgment, isn't it? Yes. Now, this very thing, good judgment, is clearly some kind of knowledge, for it's through knowledge, not ignorance, that people judge well, clearly. But there are many kinds of knowledge in the city, of course. Is it because of the knowledge possessed by its carpenters then, that the city is to be called wise and sound in judgment? Not at all. It's called skilled in carpentry because of that. Then isn't it to be called wise, or then it isn't to be called wise because of the knowledge by which it arranges to have the best wooden implements? No, indeed. What about the knowledge of bronze items or the like? It isn't because of any knowledge of that sort, nor because of the knowledge of how to raise a harvest from the earth, for it's called skilled in farming because of that. I should think so. Then is there some knowledge possessed by some of the citizens in the city we just founded that doesn't judge about any particular matter, but about the city as a whole and the maintenance of good relations, both internally and with other cities? There is indeed. What is this knowledge and who has it? It is guardianship, and it is possessed by those rulers we just now called complete guardians, so not the auxiliaries. Then what does this knowledge entitle you to say about the city? That it has good judgment and is really wise. Um, so I wonder, does really here mean very wise or truly wise? Who do you think that there will be more of in our city, metal workers or those true guardians? There will be far more metal workers. Indeed, of all those who are called by a certain name, because they have some kind of knowledge, aren't the guardians the least numerous? By far. Then a whole city established according to nature would be wise because of the smallest class and part in it, namely the governing or ruling one, and specifically just the part of the ruling group that is not the auxiliaries. And to this class, which seems to be by nature the smallest, belongs a share of the knowledge that alone among all the other kinds of knowledge is to be called wisdom. That's completely true. Then we found one of the four virtues, as well as its place in the city, though I don't know how we found it. Our way of finding it seems good enough to me. And surely courage. And so that's the kind of mark at which we'll move from wisdom to courage. So that's the first part of the soul. First part of the city. I think he circles back later and talks about the soul. And the Greek word is Andrea for courage, which is cool because my middle name is Andrew and my mom's name is Andrea. Oh, I thought to mention, my name is actually like the tripartite soul. It's super crazy. The only thing I'm missing is wisdom. Womp womp. Um, but Justin means one of justice, and Andrew means noble and brave, which is the spirit. And Hill means mighty, which is like a fierce desire or a fierce townspeople or craftsman. Um, and my dad is like stable and sturdy, and my mom is that's kind of spirit. They both have good character. Um, I disagree with them on many things. And I wouldn't wholly endorse, unfortunately, I wouldn't wholly endorse probably anybody, including myself. I'm tough on myself. So, courage. And surely, and then I think, no, we'll go through all of them because let's see how far, where does book? We were on PDF page 43. It goes down to still book four, still book four. So we've got 17 pages left. I only want to do one more video after this, maybe, but um, let's get moving. And surely courage in the part of the city it's in, the part on account of which the city is called courageous, aren't difficult to see. How is that? Who, in calling the city cowardly or courageous, would look anywhere other than to the part of it that fights and does battle on its behalf? No one would look anywhere else. At any rate, I don't think that the courage or cowardice of its other citizens would cause the city itself to be called either courageous or cowardly. No, it wouldn't. So we've already picked that it's the soldiers, the warriors. Um, the city is courageous then because of a part of itself that has the power to preserve through everything its belief about what things are to be feared, namely, that they are the things and kinds of things that the lawgiver declared to be such in the course of educating it. Or don't you call that courage? So the ruler is the lawgiver. Um, it would be interesting to wonder whether this law giving is done through action in an existential instantiation sort of way. So Kantian kind of way, you whatever you do, you give the law for every man. Sartre says this, and I think he is kind of Kantian about it. Um, or whether it's meant to be a codification. And I don't buy into the codification. I don't think that you can express in language adequately, or even mathematics adequately, the precise nature of the laws of physics, quantum mechanics, the soul, human behavior, etc. The nature of the mind to the brain. James likewise says that we've shown that they are always inadequate. That's part of his argument for truth as a fine tuning. Okay. But this is also the paragraph where that really helps you understand that the spirit in the soul is meant to preserve the things that your parents taught you or didn't teach you, or that your neighbors taught you, or your friends taught you that are passed on through habit that you've never questioned. And when you do question them and try other habits or alternative pathways to attempt to achieve the goal, you'll find that they aren't as successful. And the failures teach you that there are reasons why the habits existed in the way they did. I don't completely understand what you mean. Please say it again. I mean that courage is a kind of preservation. What sort of preservation? That preservation of the belief that has been inculcated by the law through education. Sorry, I'm gonna get a drink. I'm gonna pause, but I didn't have any copyright issues. I'm not getting promotions. It's unsweet tea. I know, unsweet, right? I feel like I'm gonna be like, I always think I'm gonna be. My Nana is the only one in my family that likes unsweet tea. My papa puts sweet and low in it because he's diabetic. And that's my mom's parents. And my mom likes sweet tea, but she doesn't make it as sweet as she used to. My dad also likes sweet tea, but he's diabetic. I think he likes Splenda. And I just like the bitterness. I okay. That preservation of the belief that has been inculcated or like instilled, instill an attitude, have idea or habit by persistent instruction. So instilled by repetition, either through passive repetition of hearing it said linguistically or through practicing it. And either through practicing failing to do it until you can do it or practicing doing it just so you learn it's the only way to do it. Um, like at a young age, you're inculcated with habits to take to bathe daily and to brush your teeth daily, if not twice a day, or sometimes after every meal for some people. Um, those inculcations can either happen through trial and error and deciding for yourself that you should do it a certain way, or they can happen through like command and order, or through like someone you trust telling you to do it this way. And you just start practicing it because you think it's good. It's like a positive thing, something you add, not something you. Anyway, that's not a problem you're solving. You could survive without it, maybe. Um, so preserves what things and sorts of things are to be feared by preserving this belief through everything. I mean, preserving it and not abandoning it because of pains, pleasures, desires, or fears. If you like, I'll compare it to something I think it resembles. I'd like that. You know that dyers who want to dye or color wool purple first pick out from the many colors of wool the one that is naturally white. Then they carefully prepare this in various ways so that it will absorb the color as well as possible, and only at that point do they apply the purple dye. When something is dyed in this way, the color is fast. No amount of washing, whether with soap or without it, can remove it. But you also know what happens to material if it hasn't been dyed in this way, but instead is dyed purple or some other color without careful preparation. I know that it looks washed out and ridiculous. Then you should understand that as far as we could, we were doing something similar when we selected our soldiers and educated them in music and physical training. What we were contriving was nothing other than this, that because they had the proper nature and upbringing, they would absorb the laws in the finest way possible, just like a dye, so that their belief about what they should fear and all the rest would become so fast that even such extremely effective detergents as pleasure, pain, fear, and desire wouldn't wash it out. And pleasure is much more potent than any powder, washing soda, or soap. This power to preserve through everything the correct and law-inculcated belief about what is to be feared and what isn't is what I call courage. So the virtues are also a power. Unless, of course, you say otherwise. And that works. That puts them in line with that puts arete, excellence, affect, power, ability, knowledge, capability, the virtues of the soul, puts them all the same thing. Different ways of describing the same thing. And that's part of what pragmatism means. Pragmatism means collapsing different languages and different dimensions of experience into the same core phenomena, but not collapsing in a way that erases difference and erases, um, strips it down to its fighting weight, but doesn't strip any of the muscle. The muscle is what each of them have. Checking on the animals again, sorry. Um, they get sick a lot, actually. That's a lot of bleach. I have nothing different to say, for I assume that you don't consider the correct belief about these same things, which you find in animals and slaves, which not appropriate, and which is not the result of education to be inculcated by law, and that you don't call it courage, but something else. I don't agree with this. But that's absolutely true. Then I accept your account of courage because I think the animals, I think every creature has spirit, uh, and has wisdom to some extent too. It just may not be the predominant aspect of what other creatures are capable of. Although I think Winchester is very wise. I don't agree with depersonalizing other creatures, stripping them of personhood or giving them less personhood than humans. That's absolutely true. Then I accept your account of courage. Accept it instead as my account of civic courage, and if you will be right, and you will be right. We'll discuss courage more fully some other time, if you like. At present, our inquiry concerns not it, but justice, and what we've said is sufficient for that purpose. You're quite right. Give me 1 second. I didn't think you guys wanted to hear the neck cricks and cracks. There are now two things left for us to find in the city, namely moderation and the goal of our entire inquiry, justice. That's right. Um, is there a way we could find justice so as not to have to bother with moderation any further? I don't know any, and I wouldn't want justice to appear first if that means that we won't investigate moderation. So if you want to please me, look for the latter first. I'm certainly willing. It could be wrong. It would be wrong not to be. Look then. We will. Seen from here, it is more like a kind of consonance and harmony than the previous ones. In what way? Moderation is surely a kind of order, the mastery of certain kinds of pleasures and desires. People indicate as much when they use the phrase self-control and other similar phrases. I don't know just what they mean by them, but they are, so to speak, like tracks or clues that moderation has left behind in language. Isn't that so? Absolutely. Yet isn't the expression self-control ridiculous? The stronger self that does the controlling is the same as the weaker self that gets controlled, so that only one person is referred to in all such expressions. Of course. So this is why I think that even Plato doesn't see reason as dominating desire, and really does not see the tripartite soul as truly separate. It's partite, it's not three things. A part is also a whole. Things with parts are also a whole. That's called mereology, by the way. Nonetheless, the expression is apparently trying to indicate that in the soul of that very person, there is a better part and a worse one, and that whenever the naturally better part is in control of the worse, this is expressed by saying that the person is self-controlled or master of himself. At any rate, one praises someone by calling himself controlled. But when, on the other hand, the smaller and better part is overpowered by the larger because of bad upbringing or bad company, that is called being self-defeated or licentious and is a reproach. Appropriately so. Take a look at our new city and you'll find one of these in it. You'll say that it is rightly called self-controlled if indeed something in which the better rules the worse is properly called moderate and self-controlled. I am looking, and what you say is true. Now, one finds all kinds of diverse desires, pleasures, and pains, mostly in children, women, household slaves, and in those of the inferior majority who are called free. Okay. Um, Pardon my French, fuck that paragraph. I don't agree with any of that. Fuck all that noise. That's right. But you meet with the desires that are simple, measured, and directed by a calculation, in accordance with understanding and correct belief only in the few people who are born with the best natures and receive the best education. I don't really believe in being born with a great nature. I do mostly believe in upbringing, education, wealth, Beneficence, blessedness, luck. Plato was a wealthy person. He could do philosophy because he had the time and the money. And I guess because he kept choosing to do it, he didn't spend that money on other things or its time on other things. But he was lucky, like Spinoza, or somebody who's effectively constrained, doesn't believe in pure freedom, would say he's lucky to have been wise enough and raised in the right way to continue choosing it. Okay, that's true. Then don't you see that in your city too, the desires of the inferior men, the inferior many, are controlled by the wisdom and desires of the superior few? I do. Therefore, if any city is said to be in control of itself and of its pleasures and desires, it is this one. Absolutely. And isn't it therefore also moderate because of all this? It is. And further, if indeed the ruler and the ruled in any city share the same belief about who should rule, it is in this one. Or don't you agree? I agree entirely. Okay. So the ruler and the ruled share the same belief about who should rule. So the ruled agree that the ruler should rule. Um, and when the citizens agree in this way, in which of them do you say moderation is located? In the ruler or the ruled? I suppose in both. Then you see how right we were to divine that moderation resembles a kind of harmony. How so? Because unlike courage and wisdom, each of which resides in one part, making the city brave and wise respectively, moderation spreads throughout the whole. It makes the weakest the strongest, and those in between, whether in regard to reason, physical strength, numbers, wealth, or anything else, all sing the same song together. So moderation is a kind of harmony. And this unanimity, this agreement between the naturally worse and the naturally better, as to which of the two is to rule, both in the city and in each one, is rightly called moderation. I agree completely. So moderation seems to have a special relation to the same harmony we see in justice, where moderation only happens with justice, and where justice is a sort of more polymodal and multidimensional moderation in all aspects. I agree completely. All right, we've now found, at least from the point of view of our present beliefs, three out of the four virtues in our city. So, what kind of virtue is left then that makes the city share even further in virtue? Surely it's clear that it is justice. That is clear. Then, Glaucon, we must station ourselves like hunters, surrounding a wood, and focus our understanding so that justice doesn't escape us and vanish into obscurity. For obviously it's around here somewhere. So look and try eagerly to catch sight of it. And if you happen to see it before I do, you can tell me all about it. So that's like a fun little page. I think it's a kind of wild, surprising metaphor that Socrates starts using to look for justice. It's a good stopping point. We're also probably at about an hour, if not less or more, give or take, whatever. Um, I'm sure the title card's been up by now. Thanks for being here, guys. We'll process this video, hop right back into it, and then I'll pack everything, go clean, pick up the rental, start moving stuff. It's gonna be a crazy few days. Um, you'll see me again soon. Thanks. Bye. Thank you all for being here. Thanks for your patience. Hope you've been enjoying Plato's Republic and enjoying spending time with me and learning from me. And I've been enjoying spending my time this way, learning more, practicing more, getting more experience reading Plato and learning this stuff better and internalizing it and instilling it in my character more. Um, it's just always good to spend your time doing these things. So thanks. Bye, guys.